So welcome, Karl.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to meet you. We've been emailing, so it's good to actually meet in Zoom person. And I look forward to hearing everybody else. Did you want to do introductions before I get started, or do you want me to take a break?
Yeah, I think we're a small enough group here that we can just kind of go around and let everybody, have a second to say who they are, and maybe if you have a chance to just tell Karl the problem that you're trying to solve right now with technical writers, that would be great to hear as well. So maybe we could start with Dan. Dan, you're the first one to join.
Sure. Dan Brown, I'm with the Linux Foundation, specifically Linux Foundation Training and Certification, where I oversee our public relations, content, social media, marketing. So no specific pain points, just I'm always looking for more writers who have technical knowledge and experience. So I'm just kind of curious what tips and tricks you've got to share.
I wrote for you guys one time. I think I did a guest post before a conference talk I did. So
nice.
Yeah, that was fun. I'll have to reach back out and do another one sometime.
Yeah, anytime.
Who's next? Lisa, are you here?
Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm from LogDNA. I oversee our PR and analyst relations, content, social, all of that good stuff. We work with a couple of different like content writing groups and some individual contributors as well. I think what I'm here to solve for is getting internal engineers to write more. And then we run into issues sometimes with contractors where they're not technical enough. And so we end up having to do a lot of editing after the fact.
Yep.
And that can be frustrating on both sides.
Nice, thanks. Jennifer Hooper.
Hey, I'm Jennifer Hooper and I work at Armory, and I'm responsible for our content strategy among working with our customers among several other hats that I wear. But really the biggest challenge coming in here is that the product that we offer is very technically complex, and it's not really easy for people to grasp all of the pieces of it, and also about our strategy or how to talk about it. And so it's been very hard to find writers who actually are able to dive into the details in a technically relevant enough way. So that's really kind of the biggest thing that I have as a challenge at the moment.
Awesome, thank you. Nick?
Hey, Libby. Nick had to step away for a bit because
okay.
he got contractors over, but I can cover the intro for both of us.
Thanks.
So hey, everyone, and thank you, NewStack team, for organizing this, and thank you, Karl, for showing us your Jedi Master ways. So I'm Victor. I'm from Cribble. Both Nick and I are from Cribble, actually. I handle I guess a bit of everything related to like customer acquisition and engagement. So with regards to like content, I would not consider myself a writer by any means, but definitely work with Nick on publishing content. And one of the challenges we'd love to learn, or one of the challenges we're hoping to solve for, is kind of similar to what Lisa was saying with like trying to get our engineers to publish more. And I get it, that's like asking them to do more, right? So, plus no one wants to listen to marketing anyways. So, that's something we'd appreciate any and all insights and tips on.
Awesome, thanks. Suzanne?
Ooh, sorry, I was parallel processing right there. So I lead open source strategy and marketing for VMware, and there are several North Stars that I'm chasing, and one of the challenges that I see is we've got some brilliant people based all over the world, and English is their second language, and when they blog or speak or write for us, their brilliance doesn't shine. It doesn't shine through. And much of the time that I spend with them is trying to craft their thoughts in the English language so that they appear as brilliant as they really are, without removing their personality. It can be really hard to edit someone like that without putting yourself into it. And because I don't speak Eastern European languages, it's very difficult for me to do that mental translation into English about what is the inference they're trying to make, and just miss the mark because they just don't have the same grasp of the idiomatic phrasing and vocabulary in English. It comes off sounding sort of primary-ish. So that's one of my big challenges.
Thank you. Chris Thornett?
Hi, I'm Chris from Constantia. I'm the senior content strategist for them. We basically focus on open source and enterprise clients. My background is publishing, so it's interesting listening to Suzanne because I kind of had a similar experience, really. So producing a highly technical magazine every month with writers that were often writing where English wasn't their first language. So yeah, I spent a lot of my time basically translating or basically freshening up what people were saying so that, it did shine. It is a difficult task, I must admit. But yeah, I'm just kind of here to hear what interesting insights there are, and see if there's anything extra that I can learn. I mean, basically, I spend my days dealing with content and writing and words. So yeah, just happy to be here and learn stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Cynthia?
I'm Cynthia Dunlop at Tricentis. I run the content. It's a software testing company, and so like Jennifer, it's very technical and it's very difficult to get people who can write credibly about the content.
Great. And Frederick?
Hi, I'm Fred Paul. I'm Director of Content at HashiCorp. Been doing this for a while at New Relic and Redis before that, working with Alex and Libby and everybody. And it's an ongoing challenge to pull out really good content from highly technical people. We're often not English speakers and not attuned to speaking to an audience rather than just sort of working things out. So hoping to pick up some good ideas.
Awesome, thank you. And I want to give a shout out to Alex, Ben, and Richard, who are all here from the TNS team too. I think you guys are all familiar with them.
And that was really helpful to get some context of where everybody's at. I wrote some notes, so I'll try to address some of these questions as we go, but I will also leave plenty of space for questions in the middle here. So I am gonna put my presentation here and try to share my screen. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, and then I just put the link to the slides in the chat if you would rather follow along that way, or pull them back later. And I'm sorry, did somebody say something? No, maybe that's just background noise. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, as you guys know, I am Karl. I run a little specialized technical writing agency called Draft.dev. We essentially focus exclusively on content written for and by software developers, engineering managers, data engineers, anybody in the engineering code space. So happy to talk about that, but I'm not going to really plug what we do. Instead, I'm going to just share pretty openly the insights I've picked up from this last year of running Draft and growing the team. And so the first thing to kind of give you a little background and kind of where I come from, and my background is probably, well, I imagine the backgrounds are mixed here. We've probably got some people who come from more marketing and some from more technical, because that's kind of what the technical marketing field tends to be. It's like a mix of people. So I come from more the technical side. For the last 10 years or so, I've been first engineer and then head of engineering and then CTO at some various startups here in Chicago. It's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to meet and hire a ton of engineers, pick a lot of software products for engineering teams. It's been really cool to see the industry progress from roll everything yourself to buy everything off the shelf, which it seems like it's heading that direction in almost every area, especially with the small to mid-sized companies. And along the way, I always wrote about things that I learned, either as an engineer and engineering manager. I just really enjoyed the process of writing and sharing and getting things out there to help others who were, coming a few years behind me, because it was always helpful for me to sort of have that guidance in the form of blog posts or ebooks or whatever medium there is. So I've always enjoyed it, and I still do a lot of writing, but not as much for clients these days. So in the last year, what I've done is kind of made a transition from running an engineering team to running a team of technical writers, which has some differences. So what we do with Draft is we help companies that are not quite at the space where they want to go hire a full-time writing team or maybe even manage a bunch of their own contractors. They're looking for maybe help on 4 to 15, 20 articles a month, maybe. It's not quite at the scale that some of the really big companies out there doing this have. And we help augment or take care of completely their content production. And so everything from coming up with some ideas to getting stuff edited and out on the blog. So in the last year, we've gone from just me doing this for a couple clients that I knew as a CTO to having, I think, about 60 writers now. They are all over the world, 27 countries. So definitely deal with a lot of ESL. Happy to share some insights and thoughts about that. And then we've got a full-time team of around 5. So we're not a huge business, but we're also really narrowly scoped. So it makes sense that we don't have a massive team going yet. We also have a lot of contract editors who come in and help with different sides. And one thing, just a quick aside, since this question was already asked, we found that it is helpful to have like at least probably a 3-step editing process in most cases. Usually there's a tech review, there is a developmental edit, and then there's a final copy edit. Obviously that can be expensive, but at the same time, like depending on what level of quality you're trying to get out of your content, this can be really helpful. So just something to think about maybe, and we can talk about more if we want to dive into that. I was gonna do introductions. We already did that, so I'll skip that. I was gonna cover 3 things today, and since nobody mentioned coming up with ideas is an especially challenging problem, I could go over this quickly and just not worry about too much. But I'm happy to spend more of the time on points 2 and 3, which are more about how we found our writers and how we continue to find them, especially because we work with a lot of companies that have a lot of technical complexity, everything from we work with BitMovein, where they do video encoding, which is kind of a whole dark art in itself, all the way over to a couple data engineering companies that are moving data from different warehousing solutions and things like that. So it's a wide range of technical expertise, and it is challenging to find people in some of those areas. But I'll quickly cover some ideas, like how you come up with ideas and some strategies I've seen work, because I do find that everybody has a different approach to this, and there's no right and wrong answer, which is fun. We're in this interesting position where we get to, oh yeah, and I guess I forgot I also put this one random slide in to kind of explain what I mean by technical content. Just quickly, we typically work with blog posts and ebooks, but I would say that videos and even like audio content could probably be lumped into this same general like set of guidelines and kind of similar ideas. So something to think about. I also, this is again a total aside, but I have some pretty strong opinions. Like I think the next generation of software engineers are going to be super compelled by video. That like the people 10 years younger than me really seem to be video first in a lot of ways, which is interesting because I'm a read first person. But if you're thinking about marketing to that next generation of engineers, this video is something I would put on your roadmap. It's definitely on ours at Draft. We haven't gotten to doing a lot of it yet, but we're starting to dabble. So anyway, okay, so 4 basic strategies. We are in this really interesting position where we don't actually do strategy for clients. All we do is execution. So our clients come to us with a mix of topics from one of these 4 strategies, generally speaking. And I think it'll be interesting to hear y'all's take on these and see if some of these resonate with what you're doing already versus things you haven't thought about. So maybe this will be helpful. The first one, if you've worked in traditional content marketing, I'll call it traditional content marketing. I guess it's like in mainstream content marketing, keyword research is kind of the bread and butter of a lot of companies. What you're going to do here is you go to a tool like Ahrefs, you try to find keywords that you could reasonably rank for reasonably quickly because they have a relatively high volume and a relatively low level of competition. This is a pretty tried and true like standard method, and it does work in developer marketing to an extent. So the clients that we've seen have the best results on this are focused in their keyword research on pretty top of funnel content that is aimed at like explainers and big picture how things work type overviews and entry level terms and things like that. Where it is hard to pull keyword research off is getting that bottom of funnel content, because the long tail keywords are just so specific that it's not going to be possible to pull any reasonable amount of volume off of a tool like Ahrefs, at least not in my experience yet. I think there are ways to kind of, and we'll talk about this in the next, there are ways to come up with ideas outside of that. Another thing to mention here is that just because you have a list of keywords doesn't mean you know what to actually write about yet, or what to send to an engineer to actually write. So if you look back at this last screen, I think I just did like a search for Docker topics that were like below 30 as competition or something like that in this Ahrefs tool. And so you find things like Docker pants. Clearly a developer would look at that keyword and say, this is not something we should write about if we're a Docker tool. But some of these are pretty legitimate. Docker cheat sheet, that could be interesting. Docker stop all containers, maybe that makes sense. Now the challenge a lot of our clients have is like, they'll get this keyword research and then they say, well, like, what do I actually need an article to say? Just because somebody's searching for Docker exec, it's like, doesn't really tell you much if you're not in the world of Docker every day. So usually what happens is you want to take this list and run it by some engineers, look at what's already ranking on Google and try to refine down what people are intending. So this is called search intent. Again, if y'all have worked in traditional content marketing for a while, you know all this stuff. So I'm not going to like beat it to death, but just something to keep in mind. It does work in certain cases. Also, keyword research is really good. This kind of like higher level, top of funnel stuff is really great for external contributors because a lot of it tends to be less tied to your product. So the nice thing there is you're going to get this like wide top of funnel, and whoever writes the piece can maybe just put in a couple CTAs for your tool, but they don't have to like go into the inner workings of it, which can be hard for external contributors to pull off. Okay, another big strategy for coming up with ideas is just augmenting your documentation. So how you come up with things to augment your documentation is a few ways here. So for example, we work with a company called CodeCov that does code coverage testing. It's a code coverage testing tool. And they have documentation. They've been around a long time. They have great documentation on how to set up CodeCov with different CI providers. So GitHub Actions or Travis CI or what have you. But what they don't have are all the combinations and iterations of how to use CodeCov with GitHub Actions and C#, how to use CodeCov with Jenkins and Java, how to use CodeCov with X and Y. And so this is where, sure, you could build these into your docs, and that's not a bad idea, but it's also a great opportunity to build out some longer form tutorials that go step by step through each piece. Also good for external contributors to contribute, because what you have to do is then just go find people in your community who've already done this and ask them to write about it. So good strategy. You can also use support and sales requests as a sort of way to come up with ideas. So if I actually think one of the best ways to get a positive ROI on content early on is focusing on sales enablement. So that's when a customer is close to closing, but they're not quite over the finish line. What questions do they ask, or what things can you reassure them of that show that A, you know what you're talking about technically, and B, that your product is the right solution for them. So this is different in every case, but we've had a lot of clients do this. And basically, yeah, sure, sales enablement content might be, it might not bring in tons of top of funnel traffic, but it's closing people, which is super valuable, easier to tie an ROI to as well. Another way that people do this is community input. So this could be searching tools like Stack Overflow, could be going to Reddit, seeing what people are talking about. It could be having your own internal Slack community for users of your tool. It totally depends on where you're at and how big your community, so to speak, is. But this is really helpful for finding, I'll call them like hidden gems. It's things that you wouldn't know unless you were a software developer actually using your tool on a daily basis. So for example, a lot of our clients, what we'll do is search Stack Overflow for mentions of their product and see what are people asking, which it sounds really basic, like that. It should be something that a lot of developer relations or marketing people think of, but you'd be surprised, a lot don't. And so really simple way to come up with some ideas is look for what people are searching for in Stack Overflow. If your product is early on, or it's a smaller, or it's like a new product that doesn't have many actual like questions and answers on Stack Overflow, another strategy is to look for related or competitive products and answer the same questions, but with your tool or what have you on your blog with blog posts, or on an external site with blog posts, because you know engineers are searching for similar things. These are also good articles for external contributors, but also really great for internal contributors. So either one works. It just depends on, we're kind of get to this in a second, but how how hard or easy of a time you have bringing your internal engineering team into the content production process. It's also, the other thing I'd mention here is it's really hard to determine potential volume. Unlike with keyword research, where you're getting like pretty good data on how many searches a month there are. You don't, I mean, just because something trended on Stack Overflow at some point and got a lot of views doesn't mean it still is. Let's say there's like an article on, you know, PHP 5, something that has tons and tons of views. PHP 5 is pretty irrelevant because we're a few generations past that. And so it may not actually get much search traffic anymore. So keep that in mind as you look through these topics. And then the last one that Libby and I were talking about does really well on places like the New Stack is your worldview. And these are thought leadership type things. It's maybe taking a strong opinion or stance on something and presenting it in a strong logical way. Obviously, these are hard to write, but these are almost always need to be done by internal team members or ghostwriters. You know, an extra, like we have clients all the time ask about, could we write this kind of, I don't know, high level point of view opinion pieces for their industry. And it's possible that sometimes we could find a writer who has the same worldview as you, but to be perfectly honest, it's going to look a lot better when it comes from someone on your team who actually lives this thing and breathes it every day. So I typically encourage clients to, you know, either find a good ghostwriter who could sit down, do interviews with you, or get your CTO to bang an article out some Saturday if you can. These are great, again, for top of funnel because they're going to bring in a whole wealth of new traffic, maybe people that are interested in your industry. Now, you don't know they're interested in your product at the end. So they're maybe mid to top of funnel again, but it's a whole new exposure to different people than you would get through just the SEO keyword research or even things like sales enablement content that we talked about a second ago. The only other caveat here with this kind of content is it does fade quickly. So you have to keep doing it if you want to keep those spikes of traffic coming. I call this like, unlike search engine based traffic that kind of grows over time as you build backlinks and do more of it, this kind of spikes and then just goes back down unless you keep promoting it. And so there's a lot more active work involved in this kind of content. But again, like those spikes can be really valuable. You can do retargeting off of those, which is really, really a good way to get in front of people more. You can build up your newsletter list and make sure that people are sharing you regularly. It's good for a lot of reasons. So generally a blend is what people, I guess like the more mature companies we work with that are sort of at a place where they can afford to, they generally do a blend of all of this kind of content. I put it out on this sort of matrix to show like where these pieces of content fit, generally speaking, on the funnel and the predictability of the results of them. Because one thing that if you're really early on and you're trying to justify content to say like a boss who maybe is more sales focused or really wants to see results before they invest more in content, you might want to think about the things that are more predictable rather than the things that are going to be a little like hit or miss, because if you have too many misses in a row, it's not going to look real good for you. So things like the keyword research or the sales enablement content that pushes people over into buying, you're going to see a sort of a steady result from. Whereas things like the worldview content, I think it's great. And if you already know that content is a great investment, then absolutely you should do it and do more of it because it is extremely unique. It's so hard to replicate. And that's the thing that like, you know, anybody can replicate keyword research, but nobody can replicate your worldview. So it's really important to get that stuff going once you've kind of got a little bit of momentum. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick break. Any questions so far on ideation? Otherwise, we'll move into the writing stuff.
I recognize that you stayed away from the term thought leadership. Was that intentional?
You know, it's not necessarily intentional. I just think that it's kind of hard to define that word sometimes. Because sometimes thought leadership to people means proving why we're the best. And sometimes it's a little broader, more like, more just like showing that I am a influential figure. And so I guess I'm not sure how, I guess these terms they get a little bit mixed up. The other thing too is like some people lump thought leadership in with like a high level definition piece where it's like, you know, why Docker is the best or how Docker works or something like that. And it's like, I wouldn't really call that thought leadership. It's more of an explainer, a high level guide. But yeah, I don't know. These terms are muddy and I don't have perfect words for all of them. Cool. So any other questions on ideas stuff? Otherwise, I'll keep moving to recruiting writers, managing writers, some of this stuff you guys were already talking about.
I think one of my questions as I popped into chat was more than just finding writers, how do you develop writers? How do you grow them into writers? I have my own little techniques, but I'd like to hear others on how they take someone who is afraid of the blank page and the English language and get them to the point where they're more comfortable. I won't say adept or daft, but more comfortable with the concept.
Yeah. So I've worked in education technology companies before, and one thing that we harped on with our products, but also I think just generally bringing on employees and contractors and everybody who's going to write and things like that, is this idea of there's a thing called the zone of proximal development, where basically it's a fancy word in education, but all it's saying is there is a space of learning where you're doing something that is just hard enough that you can barely do it, but it's not so hard that it's intimidating and seems impossible. So the key to like bringing our writers is a fine example of this. We have some writers that come in and they're basically only ready to do tutorials. Like they don't have a worldview yet. Part of it's because they don't have the experience maybe. And part of it is also that maybe they are just not experienced writers and don't have that nuance yet. So you want to stick them in tutorials and gradually get them into slightly more challenging either tutorials, or maybe you start getting them into guides, which are slightly a little bit harder to do, but not quite out of their comfort zone. You don't want to jump them straight from something easy like a tutorial to something really hard like a persuasive piece or a nuanced comparison of two products. So one thing to think about could be like, how could you get writers comfortable with a piece of writing that they are already kind of comfortable in? So just writing documentation, which might be less intimidating than putting their worldview out there.
And then conversely, and last question is, what do you do when you're faced with a piece of content from someone who believes they are a really great writer and this piece is, you know, so close to awful? And how do you gently suggest perhaps changes? And, you know, well, but I'm a principal engineer and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's yay you, but
this
is awful.
That is a great question. Man, I wish I had a magic answer. I mean, so my big philosophy on any kind of feedback is they're likely doing some things well, whether that something is maybe their ideas are good, but their organization skills are lacking, or maybe their organization makes sense, but they sort of missed the mark on a couple of things, and you've got to kind of guide them through that. Like I like to try to, when I'm editing, point out the goods that people are doing along with some of the areas for improvement to make sure we're softening some of that. But I don't have a perfect answer. I mean, honestly, like some people, like if it's bad enough, you don't invite them to contribute again, which is a bummer, but that might have to be the solution in some cases.
Yeah, some other things I've done that have softened it are around making sure that you have some peer reviews and making sure that you're framing some of the feedback on, you know, how the world will receive this versus what they've written, right? So it's like, especially when you talk about the fact that there's non-native speakers, you can definitely couch things in there like, you know what, you've got great things here, but we need to simplify this a little bit. And if you start implementing kind of peer reviews and saying, are you quickly reading that? You can also talk about it being a different format from how people read online versus other things. And so I think the gentle education piece of it can help with it. At least that's been my experience. There's always going to be those people that are, my stuff is the perfect as it is and no one dare touch it. And then, as Karl said, you just don't work with them again and tell them to go publish it on their own site.
Right. Yeah, that's a good mitigation technique we've used too. And I'm glad you brought that up. We sometimes if a writer really missed the mark on something and we're just like, we can't turn this around to a client, like it's just not going to get there. I've told them, look, we're sorry, this one, we're going to have to rewrite it, but you're welcome to publish it because we're not going to use any pieces of it, like put it on your personal blog, or, maybe I'll help you refine it a little bit before it goes there. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, that's like true of managing engineers as well, though. You have plenty of engineers who submit a pull request and they think it's God's gift to the earth, and it's
Absolutely.
not. So
Okay, thank you. I love the idea of peer reviews. That's a great strategy. My writers, content providers rarely accept gracefully commentary from someone in marketing
yes.
who,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge that I can see being tough, especially when working with internal contributors that, your engineering team, that because there is, I mean, I've worked in engineering and marketing now, like there is definitely a superiority complex that some engineers have. I'm not afraid to say that about how their work is so much more important than other functions of the business, which is, maybe there's some personality problems there, but still, I do think, I'll talk about this in the next section. So I'll go into a little more of this because I don't want to skip ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly, I would, in terms of the first question around developing people, one of the things that's worked really, especially people who are hesitant, one of the things that I've done to make it really get people engaged is you start in a way that they're comfortable with. And it maybe it's like, you give us some bullet points and we start to draft something for you, or we talk to you. And then as they keep iterating on things and you get them more and more excited and you really highlight these successes, like, hey, wow, your thing made it to the top of this page, or look at the page views, or whatever it is, it's going to give them more confidence, and you can keep working with them. And then as they review things, they'll start, not all of them, some of them will always be that way, but it's around, hey, I found that people will start to give you more and more because they're feeling more confident, especially when they get they see that something that they did, either directly or indirectly, was great. And I like to promote it in front of the whole company and really have like things that people feel like they want to strive for as well. So, the carrot and the stick, whichever way you look at it, is always helpful.
Awesome. Well, we'll do some more tips in a second, because I think the rest of this talk is basically going to be an extension of this conversation, because this sounds like the area we want to get the most focus in. Okay, so I've tried a lot of things. When I first started Draft, it was me freelance writing for a couple of clients. That was easy. Then I started to bring on I started with friends. That was kind of my, and people I'd worked with in the past. I reached out to engineers I had worked with or interviewed or been colleagues at places that I knew could write, got them to write. And then we started to expand from there. And once we got to like 20 or 30 writers, we started, a little before that, probably 10 writers, we're starting to find people on Upwork and Fiverr. And that was really bad. It just never worked out. I think somebody mentioned this earlier, like a lot of the writers were okay writers, but not technical enough, even if they called themselves technical writers. So we found we really needed programmers, but the programmers on Upwork were there to do programming and not necessarily write. So that was not really a good fit. It was just has not tended to work well. So what has worked well, the sort of 4 steps approach that we take and or that we recommend and that clients of ours use is this. And so let's get into asking your engineers, because this is super hard. Almost every call I have with a client starts off with, we started off trying to get our engineers to write and just realized that was going to take, it was way too hard to get any volume of content going because they have a full-time day job. And so the biggest problem here is lack of time. Sometimes it's lack of interest in writing or lack of skills in writing. But a lot of the time, the other thing that comes up is they have a lack of skill coverage. So maybe your tool is built in Python. So your engineers know Python, and maybe they know JavaScript, and maybe they know 2 or 3 other languages. But if you want to start writing about your SDKs in Java, well, maybe nobody on the team knows that. And so that starts to become a limiting factor as well. The other thing the things that I've found most helpful, and you guys already touched on these, first one is get buy-in. So go to the engineering leaders and see how you can make it part of their week-to-week process. So that if that means you go through some rotation where all the engineers who volunteer are going to have 1 day per sprint to write an article, maybe that you can negotiate something like that. But it's got to come, they have to be given the time and the space for it. If they're not, then you're asking them to do things in their off hours, which is a little unfair, but also just really hard to get any kind of, deadlines in place and things like that. So something to think about here is like, can you get buy-in? Can you make it part of the engineering process? Can you make it a cultural thing where we're all trying to contribute to the success of the company here? And part of that is getting the word out. And a little part of that is every month you're going to have one day where you're dedicated to write a blog post. Again, not every organization could do this. Not every company, it's like marketing team has the pull to make this happen, but I have heard a couple that do. So it is something you can do if you can get there. And then giving them a structure is really helpful. So again, with writers who are not super experienced writers, they don't really know to write an outline first. I think it's maybe to those of us who have written a lot, it seems obvious, but a lot of our writers come in and they think they're actually decent writers, but they don't know how to structure an article and how to plan it and how to organize their thoughts in a way that's coherent. So they when I started off, I didn't know this either. I gave out a pitch to a writer and it was just like a title and a 2-sentence description. And I got something completely different from what I had anticipated. And I realized that I was not giving them enough structure. So now we create whole 1-page briefs for each article. We basically have the client, check off those, and then we get them over to writers. And that has dramatically improved the outcome of our results because again, our writers are all part-time, right? They're doing this on the side. So this is not their full-time job either. And then the other thing is get ready to edit. And we'll talk in a second about how like editing costs can get to be just as high as our writing costs in some cases. It's not ideal. I mean, we don't want that, but we go through several rounds of tech review and developmental edits and copy edits. And so it's a lot. I mean, that's just part of it. And so some of that is going back and forth with the engineers. Some of it is just cleaning up inconsistencies and formatting. It's all part of it. Anything else any other tips on getting your engineers to write? Because I'd love to hear more feedback from you guys because we don't have internal engineers that write for us. It's kind of like a little bit different in our case.
This is Alex. I was wondering if anyone uses, different tools, for instance, for dictation. So engineers may, speak to what they know and then shape it afterwards. I'm thinking of tools like otter.ai, but I'm wondering if anyone does use any tools like that to try to help facilitate.
I'm actually, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
No,
Okay.
I've spoken plenty. You go ahead.
So for me, it depends on the situation. We do use Otter, but I often find that something where we're recording the session itself is additionally helpful. And sometimes even with like a Zoom call or something else, even if you're both in the same room, can be extremely helpful because sometimes you miss these. Well, Otter and all of those transcription services are far from perfect, especially when you get into technical pieces. But what's more important is the intonation and the facial expression sometimes on really understanding what they're trying to say versus what they are saying. And when I've just done voice or audio, I feel like it misses something. So that's what I do, is just trying to have, either video or something there.
Yeah, we do a similar thing. We just do interviews with some subject matter experts, depending on the article. And it's a similar thing. We record the Zoom call and then pull quotes from that. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Like format it kind of like a Q&A session. So there's the structure that you are thinking of, and then you get the technical information from them, turn that into a written piece, and then give them an opportunity to edit or add to it once the piece is already written.
Yep. I think that's a really good one. It can save a lot of time because they might only have to spend 1 to 2 hours, total. Whereas if you're asking them to write a whole article and like for inexperienced writers, it can take 8 hours to write an article. It's for those of us who write like every day, it's like, you might be able to crank out 1,000 words in an hour or something. I don't know if you're faster than me, but the engineers who don't write every day, it's sometimes a struggle. Okay, so another angle here is just hiring full-time people to do this writing. So several of our clients actually hire full-time developer relations people who just do writing, especially stuff that is harder for external contributors to write. So typically these people are called developer relations or developer marketing. This field is like still figuring out what to call everything. So I hear them called a lot of different titles, but this is an option. It's expensive, and you still have some of the challenges of like limited types of articles they can write based on their experience. So if they come into it with an engineering background, but they've only worked in Ruby, are they going to be able to write something in C#? I don't know. It depends how quick they are at picking up new languages and how much time you want to give them to do that. But it gives you a ton of control over the content's quality and consistency because they're full-time in charge of basically writing and maybe doing some speaking or something like that.
I was wondering if anyone uses, if anyone hires developer relations people without who don't have the technical experience, but may be able to write in a technical manner because they've just covered it enough, maybe as journalists or otherwise. Does DevRel always have to be technical?
My opinion on that is pretty much yeah, because they otherwise they get caught out. So if you're going to hire a community manager that has superb communication skills, writing, presentation, can work a room, read a room, make people feel good together, have them paired up with the person who can talk code. Because that's what's ultimately what the community is interested in. So have a pairing, because sometimes you get people that can speak code, but they cannot work a room. They shut it down. It's like cold.
That's a good point. And I think DevRel is hard because it can be a lot of different skill sets. Like if you expect your DevRel person to build and manage a community, help you with open source projects, speak at conferences, and write blog posts, which a lot of DevRel people sort of get put in charge of. And they have to be kind of a technical background, like good luck. That's a unicorn. That's really hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
As far as, I think, Lisa, you were asking about the kind of content they do. I've seen a couple different angles here. One is kind of, I'll call it product marketing, where they're doing like basically announcing features and like updates, because it's, again, hard for external contributors to write that kind of content because we don't know your product like you do. The other thing that I've seen DevRels do is the like a little more of that point of view, thought leadership-y kind of stuff, where because they know the company really well. They know the company's worldview and what would stand. And so if it's something that's a little lower level than what a CEO or CTO would write, then it might make sense for a DevRel person to kind of take that stance and write it. And they're going to have a lot better or more inline opinions than an external writer may. Okay, and then this one is, I know, probably the most about direct experience, because this is what we do basically full time. So of our 60 writers that are active right now, we also have another 100 or so applicants at any given time that are just like in the queue. And so we've built a pretty good engine for both recruiting actively writers for certain topics, as well as just taking submissions from writers. So a lot of our clients also do this, and they run a community writing program, and this is basically the formula they use. If there's pros and cons to this. Again, there's like, I've kind of talked about how like external writers are good for certain kind of content, not great for other kind of content. So you do have to like know the limits here. But the two things we do. So first is direct outreach. So because we're working with clients who are covering a ton of different tech topics, and some of them are pretty niche or pretty specific, we go out and look at who's writing things on Dev.to, Medium, other publications. I mean, the New Stack. I don't think we've actively recruited people writing on the New Stack, but there's another place you can go. D-Zone maybe is another one. A lot of these community sites where people are out there, software engineers are out there writing for their own, just getting their name out there. You can reach out to these people, and we actually have really good response rates if we are doing it in a personalized and genuine way. I think it's 10 to 20% of people that we email probably respond to this and say like, yeah, this would be cool. I'd love to write an article and, get paid a little bit for it and just get my name out there in another publication. So yeah, this is definitely worth doing. You can also look at like people who've written books on topics and try to, see if they'd be interested in doing it. They might be more expensive because they are more professional writers, but we'll talk in a second. Like money is not really the big motivator for a lot of external contributors because they are doing it for the publicity or the getting to learn interesting things and get their worldview out there more too, if you're willing to give them a byline. So anyway, that's a trade-off you have to decide to make too. The other thing you can do, there's a GitHub repo that's gotten pretty popular called Community Writer Programs that myself and a couple other people maintain, but basically it's a big list. I think it's like 100 companies that pay software developers to write articles. If you want to start a community writer program, this is great. Go put your stuff out here. If you want to know who else is doing this, then maybe you can find some companies on this list and reach out to them, see how they're doing it, learn more, get more one-on-one insights. This has been really great for, it tends to be a lot of more junior engineers, earlier career people. So, again, if you've got some really specific tech needs, maybe this doesn't quite hit the nail on the head for you. But if you're looking at writing some general purpose tutorials and you don't mind ESL writers or, whatever, there's a lot of good examples of community writing programs like this doing really well. DigitalOcean has done this for years and they have thousands of articles written by community members. They have a full-time team that then edits and cleans up those articles, but still they're out there in the community paying people to do this. So you can take that model and try to adapt it too. So it works pretty well. It's just maybe a bit more work on the editorial side. And then obviously what we do is sort of a mix of both because we're out there recruiting for you, and there's other agencies like us too. So we're not the only people doing this, but essentially we're going to be a little more flexible than hiring, more expensive than hiring freelance writers to write one-off articles. We're going to have limitations, the same limitations, a lot of them that freelancers would. We're doing a lot of this is basically what we do. Full disclosure, we're just out there recruiting and getting writers and then matching them up to the right clients. So yeah, that's kind of the typical strategies I see for getting writers. Another one that I didn't mention that, because we kind of talked about this earlier, I'll say is there is also executive ghostwriting. So if you're looking for higher level thought leadership content, there are people who know a couple. So if you want a referral, I'm happy to send that over too. A couple of people though out there that do this technical executive ghostwriting. It's pretty expensive as well, but it is if your CEO is too busy to write articles, that's certainly a good option.
Do you charge it you charge it a monthly basis? Is that what you say?
We basically sell packages that end up being per article basis, but then there's sort of, different add-ons that people have. And we're very standardized, and because we only do the execution side, our prices are up on the website. So our base package is $1,200 per article essentially.
How long are your articles, words? And then do you place these articles under your writers' names, or are they under the sponsor's name? How does that work?
Yeah, so typical articles are 1,500 to 2,000 words. We do some variations there. With attribution, we typically, so our standard rate is for attributed to the writer, so with a byline for the writer, or just at least their name on it. Again, money is not their big motivator. They're out there doing it for the, getting their attention for their careers too. But then we do have sort of other, we'll charge a premium rate and pay the writer more to do ghostwriting, and we can do that for some people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we don't do direct placements ourselves. Usually the clients we work with take the content and either publish it to their site or third-party sites, depending on what their content strategy is. It is helpful for us to know where it's going to be placed because we'll write with that audience in mind, but that's kind of up to the clients.
That was actually my next question. So, obviously, we have a sponsorship with the new stack, but, so would we would then initiate the request with new stack, or if we if it made sense to place the article elsewhere, is that something we have to do, or is that something y'all would do?
Yeah, at this point, we don't get into the placement sides.
Okay.
So yeah, you'd have to initiate that. We'll have to talk more with the new stack team about how we might partner up to do that, but we haven't gotten into that yet, just because it's,
we're on the same wavelength, Karl.
Yeah. What's interesting, and the reason we haven't yet is just that there's so many different angles that people take for how to distribute their content, and none of them are necessarily right or wrong. But because of the complexity and we're being so, a relatively small agency, we haven't gotten into that yet. Someday, I hope we get there.
Are you able to recommend best placement for the article since your writers are writing them?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back. Ends up being pretty individualized. So maybe we can talk offline just to like get into your specific use cases. But yeah. Any other questions on recruiting writers and like convincing your engineers? And those are the two big ones we wanted to really touch on here. Otherwise, I have a few more things on managing these writers once you get them. Okay.
Is there anything that the group wants to make sure we cover in the last 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds like maybe we should continue. Okay.
I will do this, and this should be quick, but I kind of already mentioned some of these things. So we put up our briefs that we use with writers, and I think we've updated this a little bit since we first published this, but essentially the core information is pretty similar. We give each writer about a 1-page brief with each article they're going to write, and this gives them a pretty good outline, what they need to cover, as well as who the intended audience is. Again, this clears up a lot of questions that the writer might have about how they should be doing an article. I highly recommend this if you're going to work with any kind of subject matter expert writers. Give them some kind of outline. Or another strategy some clients use is like they'll ask their writer to create an outline, and then they'll approve it, and then they'll go forward with it. So that can be a little slower, but it is also a good way to make sure that you're covering everything and that you're both aligned on what the goal is. I kind of already mentioned this. Like our ideal split is we want to invest most of the budget for each article essentially on paying the writer, but there are times when it's closer to 50-50, and there are times when things go wrong and we spend way more on editing than we do on writing, which is unfortunate, but just something to keep in mind, like as you think about how much is it going to cost to say work with a freelance writer or to hire even a full-time technical writer. If you get somebody who's not great at self-editing, this can end up being pretty expensive. So keep this in mind for budgets. We use a writing rubric. I also put this online for hiring and recruiting freelance technical writers. And so this is something else you can grab, but essentially it's just like, we want to assess people objectively on the same metrics every time. So we get over 100 applications a month now. So it's really hard to go through those and assess people in a clear, objective way. So we came up with this. Yours is probably going to, the presentation is also shared. I think I put the link up higher in the chat, but maybe it doesn't connect down. Here's the link again. And then the last thing here is money's not the only motivator for external freelance writers. And we do pay our freelance writers pretty well. And a lot of them, the more experienced ones end up they get raises throughout the year too. So it's important for a lot of them to show that you appreciate their work, but you have to think about also there's a lot of trade-offs that you can offer. So can you give a byline on a place that is going to help their career out? Because a lot of these engineers are doing this primarily to showcase their expertise for a future job interview or on their resume or something. A lot of them also do it for learning purposes. So say you've got like a tutorial, you want some kind of in-depth tutorial done. We have a lot of our writers who just want to learn new stuff all the time. They realize that their day jobs, they're kind of working on 1 or 2 pieces of technology and that's it. And they kind of want to branch out a little bit. So they might take something they're a little less familiar with or have only read about and just learn it to write a tutorial, which takes a ton of time. But again, think about their advancement of their career, it's really valuable. And then the other thing is, do you have a cool product that you can help, that you can sort of get out there? So there's a lot of buzziness in software development products and tools. Like a lot of them are considered cool and engineers want to have worked with them. So if you can build that kind of buzz, it is really helpful. A couple of our clients are I don't know, they have a little bit of a reputation that is good among our writers. And so the writers always clamor for their articles, which is it's funny, but because they all, it's all paid the same rate, but at the same time, there's just certain companies that people want to work for. So make yourself into that kind of brand. It could be a good thing. Awesome. That's all I got, I think. I didn't cover a ton of stuff that I was like, this would be cool to cover, like tracking results, how to pay people legally and tax-wise. That's a whole nother topic. Can be tricky depending on which countries you're working with, promoting content, scaling up this process, because we're producing hundreds of articles at a time. So it's just a ton of content. That's a whole thing, but I figured that was less relevant for most people. But let me know if you have other questions or you want to follow up after. I don't want to go over time. So thanks again.
Thanks very much, Karl. Really good.
Karl.
Thank
I was
you,
going to
very
ask you about
insightful.
diversity, but you can.
That's another great topic.
That
We'll
is
have to
great.
have another one of these because I think this has been
Yeah.
super
How you
helpful for
do that.
everyone. I
Yeah.
should
Cool,
mention
brilliant.
too that TNS does have a few sponsors that are already working with Karl. And typically one of the strategies that they've employed is to reserve one of the articles from their package to run on the new stack, and then they are running their content with other sites or blogs as well. So something to keep in mind.
Or their own blog. I mean,
Or their
you
own
know,
blog.
it's always nice to have some content to build up your own domain authority to and link back to, you know, because early on you want to have some good things to link to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everybody.
much, Karl. Thanks everyone for
Yeah.
joining.
Good to see everybody. See y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye
I
bye.
will be sending out this recording for everyone in the sponsor newsletter next month.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
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 Bye.